We are going to get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Nicole Naditz, and I am your host for these two webinars that we will be doing, one tonight and one on Tuesday, that we hope you'll also be able to join us for. And we will be looking tonight at enacting performance assessment through project-based language learning. And I will tell you more about our guests in just a few minutes. We have some introductory material to do, and then I think you will be blown away by our guests and everything that they are going to be sharing with us. This program was conceptualized and designed by the National Foreign Language Resource Center, which is one of 16 language resource centers in the United States. The NFLRC has worked on project-based language learning, or PBLL, since 2015 and has produced a wealth of resources. To learn more about the NFLRC and its resources, please visit nflrc.hawaii.edu. Before I launch into kind of the introductory segment of our webinar today, I did want to point out to you the Q&A feature. So in addition to the chat, if you have a specific question, it will be helpful if you find the Q&A tool in your toolbar and pose your question there. You can pose a question for either of our guests or for myself. And then we will work on incorporating all of those questions into our conversations today. And I will be trying to keep an eye on and monitor the chat as well as the Q&A, but we also have the support of Richard Medina at the NFLRC, who will also potentially jump in if we have some questions and things to address. So feel free to use those features. Oh, hold on a second. Of course, my picture, I forgot to undo the link to the image source. Okay, let's try that again. Perfect. So our overarching question for both webinars, actually, in what ways do performance assessments and high quality project-based language learning intersect to provide compelling outcomes for learners? So hopefully over the course of the conversations today and the conversations next week, we'll all walk away with some ideas and understandings that we can take back into our practice. So we're going to start first with a little orientation to high quality project-based learning, or HQPBL, so that when you hear about the projects that our guests are going to share, you'll see exactly how thoughtfully they were designed and how they represent this process. Project-based language learning has the potential to be highly multidisciplinary. And even though this is an important affordance of PBL, it can also be a significant constraint if educators from different disciplines don't have a common understanding of what a high-quality project is. In order to facilitate a multidisciplinary approach to project-based learning in world languages, the NFLRC chose to base much of its work on PBLL on the conceptual framework created by PBL Works. And this was adopted by schools or districts that deeply integrate PBL in their practice. Taking advantage of this existing framework gives world language teachers a common vocabulary to design and develop projects with colleagues in other disciplines. It also gives them a shared vision for quality projects and creates opportunities to design multidisciplinary projects where the world language component is as strong in terms of learning and engagement as the components in other academic areas that are parts of the project. Because of this, the NFLRC chose not to create a new framework for PBL for languages, but rather strengthen existing frameworks by providing a world language perspective to the design and implementation of quality projects. The NFLRC has been actively engaged in conversations about PBL and was represented in the initial group that created the HQ PBL framework. And so that leads us to the 6 elements of the HQ PBL framework. So the high quality project-based learning framework calls out 6 components of project-based learning. The first one is intellectual challenge and accomplishment, where students learn deeply, think critically, and strive for excellence across content areas. The second component is authenticity, meaning that students work on projects that are meaningful and relevant to their culture, their lives, and their futures. A third component of high quality project-based learning is a public product. Students' work is real and publicly displayed. It's discussed and critiqued. I sometimes refer to this as students engaged in learning experiences that result in products for an audience beyond the teacher and a purpose greater than a grade. A fourth component of HQPBLL is collaboration, where students collaborate with other students in person or online, or they might receive guidance from adult mentors and content experts. The fifth component of high quality project-based learning is project management. So students actually learn to use a project management process that enables them to proceed effectively from project initiation to its completion. And finally, we have reflection, where students reflect on their work and on their learning throughout the project. And with that, we are ready to start hearing about some specific high quality project-based learning experiences that our guests have facilitated. So I am thrilled to introduce you to our two exceptional educators and accomplished practitioners of both project-based language learning and performance assessments, which we will discuss more in this session. Together, we will explore possible intersections between HQPBLL and performance assessments in world language programs and the potential that exists for impacting student outcomes in very positive ways by leveraging those intersections. Catherine Ousselin teaches French and is a digital literacy coach for Mount Vernon Schools in Washington State. She is a frequent presenter and workshop presenter at conferences around the country. Catherine is the president of the PNCFL, and she's the AATF Director of Media Integration and Curated Resources. In 2017, she was a finalist for ACTFL's National Language Teacher of the Year. Dr. Alegria Ribadeneira is a Director of World Languages and Professor of Spanish at CSU Pueblo. She is also the lead instructor for the NHLRC. Her work focuses on pedagogy, assessment, and program development for heritage and second language learners. She is internationally recognized for her work with PBL and open educational practices. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you.
Very happy to be here.
I'm super happy to be talking with you. We are going to start with Catherine, who's going to share about one of her HQPBLL projects.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to tell you that, what I'm going to share tonight is actually a multi-year experience because we do a lot of spiraling in French too. So my mid to high, novice level students are in their first experience are going to look at school lunches around the world, and they're going to be exploring and comparing, contrasting their school lunch experience with that of another country, another Francophone country. And what we do after that is we build a project that we present to our school district, to our school board, and we invite lots of people in to come listen to us as we do round robin poster presentations. And in fact, we invite one of our school board members who is, he was a Doctor Without Borders participant. And it's amazing because he's actually a school board member and he speaks French and he understands this. So what better place? Plus our superintendent at the time, he spoke French. Plus we invite in a French, a chef and a couple of artists that live in our area to come in and listen to us discuss what are we doing, because we live in an agricultural area, so Mount Vernon, Washington, where we grow the potatoes, the blueberries, so many of the foods that you eat. Why aren't we using this in our school lunch? Okay, so that's French too. Then the next year that we look at is waste. And our whole idea is about food waste. And we base that on the fact that our school lunch isn't the best. Let's be honest about that. And what happens is that students tend to throw it away. And we wanted to look at that. What is our problem? Our problem is that all this food that we get on a truck every day that's frozen, that's put into a microwave, kids look at it and they throw it away. So we worked with our AP environmental science teacher, who is also looking at food waste. So we combined those two groups. And luckily, those students are usually juniors or seniors. So they're also in French 3 at that level. And we said, let's investigate our food waste in our school lunch here at school, and then look at our community. So we got together and the students are actually going into the trash and weighing the food that's been thrown away and looking at what is mostly thrown. Is it the hamburgers? It's the French fries. So they were doing some analysis. That's a big deal, by the way, getting kids to go through trash. Not something, but really it is because the APES teacher, we call them APES, so the AP environmental science teacher who spearheaded this, and I looked at her and I said, oh my gosh, that ties in perfectly. So it was interdisciplinary. That ties in perfectly what we were talking about. Our school lunch is not great. What are we wasting and how can we prevent that? So what you're looking at is one of the aspects of our project when the students, they knew the problem, they were looking for solutions. We connected them with several social media outlets and authentic resources that get them to investigate the question, the problems, the solutions, and what people are doing around the Francophone world to solve this problem. Okay, so that's a big deal already. The students are looking at home and they're looking at the world, and we're trying to compare and contrast to make those cultural comparisons. One of our projects is to say, what can I do at home to waste less food? And this was something that I came up with. It was an investigation. I wanted them to tell me, what do you typically have in your refrigerator that you think your family throws away most often? So I had them kind of chart the food that's in their refrigerator, and maybe they were throwing away the apples or the bananas or the leftovers. So we made up this list together, and I produced some cards, and you see those on that big middle picture there with the yellow and blue cards. Those are food words that the students provided. And we said, okay, now one of our activities is how can we be creative users of our food that's left over? And I had them kind of do they had a bag and it had all these cards in it, and they were going to choose out 7 different foods, and they had to come up with a recipe. What can you cook with the leftovers that are in your refrigerator? What's the creative thing you can do? So you see them that they're working together. They're looking at ways that they can construct their phrases so that they can offer opinions, give suggestions. Okay, that's a really good level, moving them up to the intermediate mid with their ideas. How to connect sentences, describe things with details, making those bigger jumps towards the intermediate mid, intermediate high level of language. Plus, they were working together to find recipes that could possibly use these unusual foods. I mean, there was like pizza and pasta and spaghetti sauce. What are you going to do with that? And, sometimes ice cream was in the mix, and they had to come up with something. And so you see them on the next picture on the right side with that circle with the food in there. They actually had to come up with a recipe, how you're going to cook it, what are the ingredients, and then you're going to share that out to the group. And the others are going to look at it, critique it, and say, I would eat that, I wouldn't eat that, right? But in the end, the big idea is, how do we look at our food consumption in our area, because hunger is a reality in our area, and what can we do to reduce hunger and waste of our food? This is actually a 3-year-long project. It starts in French 2, it moves into French 3, and then whether it's AP or French 4, we continue it with hunger around the world and what is our global situation with food? Where does the food that we come from? And we talk about that a lot because Mount Vernon is one of the largest producers of blueberries in the United States. And a lot of our students, their families work in the fields and the farms that produce this food for our country. So that was our first big, that was such a massive project, and it just came out of school lunch. What can we do with that? But what I like to do is sort of, have that spiral effect, because if we have really a good thing that gets kids going, and they love talking about food. Okay, so we're pulling in those authentic resources, and we have the students going online and talking to different organizations in the French-speaking world that work on anti-gaspillage, like they're trying to reduce food waste. Mm-hmm. What should we do? And they were asking the questions to these professionals, either in tweets, or we had a chat one time with a chef that he came in. He cooks in France at a middle school, and he invited us in, and he wanted us to show how he uses the local food to cook these amazing meals at his middle school. And the students were amazed, like, so you grow that stuff and you actually use it in your school lunch. And that way, students have that connection to the food that they grow, to what they eat. And if you know that food, if you grow that food, you're probably not going to throw it away. You understand where it came from. Mm-hmm. That's our project. And it's been a real interesting thing to get the kids involved with the different aspects of posing the questions. So it's definitely intellectually challenging, right? The authenticity, this is a real experience for them. Public product, like I said, we had the school board come in and look at our poster projects. We invited other French speakers, native and non-native speakers, to come in and watch. And then we also shared it out on social media. So we have an Instagram, and the students were using a hashtag anti-gaspillage. I'm not sure, no food waste in Mount Vernon. And then we had them put up posters around the school that they made in French, Spanish, Intriqui, and Mixtec, and different languages that are currently spoken in our school.
Thank you so much. I'm always taking notes because I'm always learning from everybody that I have the chance to listen to or speak with. And, you know, a lot of things attracted my attention in this. I think you might know, Kathleen, too. I had also, one of my PBL experiences was focused on food waste as well. And so I love hearing different ways to go about it. And there is so much to this, and I think we're going to hear the same when we hear from Alegria, in the sense that this was meaningful to students. It's driven by student inquiry. It's driven by something that the students notice and identify as either an avenue of interesting inquiry or research, or in this case, a problem that they want to tackle. It has so many aspects, right? When you look at, as Catherine said, right, when you were talking about your project and you were pulling out those 6 components of high quality project-based language learning. So we had the collaboration with teachers of other disciplines, and we had the authentic products, and we had the project management piece, which really was more complicated by the fact that you're doing it over those 3 years. And one of the things I would call out for everybody too is something that came up really quickly, but that sense of working with other people who are in some way a content expert in the work that the students are engaging in. And looking at not being afraid to just go ahead and reach out to a school chef and see if they'd be willing to connect in a virtual chat, a Zoom, you know, something like that. Reaching out to those professional organizations or humanitarian organizations or anti-waste organizations, whatever the topic is, and engaging directly with them in this work. And it really just makes it not just more powerful for the learners, but more rewarding. And I noticed a couple of things have come up in the Q&A, and I'm finding that I can't see the Q&A while I'm sharing my screen. So Richard, is there anything at this point that we would like to address in the Q&A?
I'm looking
Yes.
Go ahead, Richard.
We have 2 questions that are relevant to Catherine's presentation. So here is one. I wondered how, in this situation of remote learning, can we help students engaged in project-based language learning given the restrictions of movement and social distancing? That's from Rahim Al-Baid.
Can I answer that one first? I would say that I'm very careful right now about asking students to share too much of their home lives with me. Food need and hunger is a very real situation in my students' homes right now. And I don't think I would do this project necessarily in the distance learning. But I do have a lot of students who work at fast foods restaurants. So they work at McDonald's, they work at different stores. I said, well, why don't we could take pictures of that food waste? What do you see? And there was a couple of questions about that, because they said, well, Madame, people waste less food when they go and pay for it at a restaurant than what's in their refrigerator. So we actually talked about that, like what is it that will make you finish that entire meal right there? But then we also talked about a couple of my students who work at Olive Garden. They said they give you such big portions that you bring it home in a box, but then you never finish it and then you throw it away. So that got us onto a whole nother, like, what type of foods will we save and what will we throw away? We were having some really in-depth conversations, but the aspect of them sharing what they're throwing away at home right now, or what we're not wasting, or what we're wasting at school right now. It's something that I stepped away from for this year, just because I didn't want to involve them too much with sharing too much of their private lives.
And I would say, before we jump to the next question, in addition to that, while we might not do the same projects, it is possible, not necessarily easy, but definitely possible, to engage students in the kind of work that reflects the 6 elements of high quality project-based learning in a distance learning environment. But that's going to come with some additional work that has to happen first around building a true community of learners in this online setting, which is challenging, and getting, if the learners are to the point where there's something that they want to investigate and inquire, it might be that you do a mini PBL, for example, but you can still engage with a number of authentic resources. One thing this distance learning situation has done is that it has made everyone, including the students, more savvy about how to reach out to people and the different ways we can connect with people. So engaging with relevant content experts might actually be even more natural feeling than it was before. And then using tools that are built into our learning management systems and so on for some collaborative workspaces, whether it's something as simple as a Google Doc or something more robust, depending on what your learners are accustomed to and wanting to do. There are ways to do that. And I know that in distance learning, we have to be really thoughtful about trying to continue that really meaningful and engaging work. Just like Catherine said, we've refocused. We're still talking about food waste, but we're refocusing it in a different way in order to be really responsive to what students might be experiencing right now.
Right.
But that is another thing to consider as far as using the tools that are available to you in your distance or hybrid learning formats to engage learners in collaboration, to engage learners in inquiry, to help learners connect with content experts, to help learners create and produce and share products. They have these tools at their disposal as part of distance learning. I see several more questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I do. No, I see them too. So
we're just thinking the same way.
Yes.
Catherine, do you want to just take the ones you want to address?
So the other question I see is about assessment. When we were working on school lunch, we had this definite goal, is that we used to say, as novice low, novice mid students, I like pizza. Okay, that's very basic, just one sentence. And as we move them forward in the distance learning situation, from March to June, okay, those level 2 students, we're working on this great jump from I like pizza because it is savory and crunchy and melty. We added on to that. And so then I was able to help the students produce that language. And that was part of our assessment is, can you take a basic sentence and add some details to it and give some reasons why and add opinions? In my opinion, the pizza from Domino's is better. I mean, we have them doing these language chunks, and I'm saying, you can't stay at this level anymore. Of course, I told them a little bit nicely. You need to add on to that. And I designed some activities for them on Seesaw. If you know Seesaw, it's a great way to do that. And just some flipped videos for them to see what that language would look like, okay? And then because we were in distance, I was able to send them to the different sites. So they were going to the chef's Instagram and they could leave comments on his. He is such an amazing man, Christophe Demain. He answered my students' comments and questions via Instagram. And if they were on Facebook, he would answer them via Facebook. But when we were assessing them from a distance, I was looking at their language production and also their interculturality. Did you understand what it is? If we grow it there, we're probably going to use it in our national, like our traditional foods, right? So we looked at the school lunches from Dakar, from Senegal. We looked at them from French Polynesia. So there was a lot of fish. And I had shared with them some pictures, and they said they have raw fish for lunch. And so we're building those intercultural capacities, those competencies. And that's part of the assessment. What can you tell us about what does school lunch look like here? And what did you notice, so that you can compare and contrast? I had them pick out those 2 menus. So I made a Google map with them of the different school lunch menus from around the world. Unfortunately, most schools were also on distance learning. So we were looking at menus perhaps from a couple months ago,
Sure.
but they were still authentic.
Mhm.
And I was having them compare, like, here's what the thing they're eating. And can you tell me more? Would you eat this? Why wouldn't you? And they say, I wouldn't eat fish because it's raw and I hate raw fish. I mean, that's our language development right there and our cultural competencies.
And they care because they're looking at things and wanting to talk about them
And they
while they're
also,
developing their cultural knowledge.
exactly. And even though we were missing the school lunch cafeteria experience, although most of them said they didn't miss the noisy, loud
Not much.
food. Yeah. But they still had that. They also wanted to share their memories, their connections to what school was for them.
Yeah.
So when we talk about assessing them, I did look at their language, language and their cultural competencies. And I have a nice little rubric that help get them from that novice mid-level to
Yep.
maybe a little intermediate low language, just for, fun.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I'm looking at if there's any other questions there.
Yeah, if you can take probably just if there's at most one more.
I think I've answered most of them.
Oh, good. That's
Okay.
awesome. Thank you. And I really like how you drew out that the way that you supported learners to go from the language they have to adding whether they're using sentence frames and chunks of language to be able to take their skill and ability to communicate to a new level in a way that's comfortable and appropriate for them as learners. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'd just like to point out that we have a question from Vivian, but I think our second speaker, Alegria, will speak to project-based language learning at the post-secondary level.
Perfect.
That's awesome. That turns it right over to you, Alegria. Oops, hold on. Let me switch the slide.
That's great that I have that experience. I was loving listening to Catherine because I love that you have the students for such a length of time that you can work on a project for 3 years. To me,
Yes.
is amazing, right?
Isn't that special? Like, it's one of the great things about being a French teacher in almost any school on the West Coast.
Yeah, that's got to be incredible because we get them for a semester, and if we're lucky, we get them in the next class. But the next class is completely self-contained, and you have new students, so it's quite different. But I'm happy that you were talking about food because it is such a great it's such a great topic. My project is sort of like food in the sense that I think that it works a lot with very deep cultural aspects. I'm a Spanish professor at Colorado State University, as you all may remember from the introduction. This project I did on a class. We do a lot of content-based learning. So the class was called Health and Well-Being in the Spanish-Speaking World. And we were talking about a lot of the problems, and probably the one that has become even more obvious right now with coronavirus is the disproportionate amount of Hispanics that don't go to the doctor and don't do preventive care, right? And so why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? We don't do that because there's Vicks Vapor Rub. And Vicks Vapor Rub will cure everything. And so we will try all our home remedies before we go to the doctor. And this has an impact in the community for sure. So I really wanted to explore, and my students wanted to explore more of the home remedies. So we came up with the Home Remedies Project. And for the project, the students created a book containing traditional home remedies. And each student was in charge of 2 pages of the book, and they had to include information that they would gather after interviewing a Hispanic person. Now, my classes are mixed. So some of them had relatives, family, but some of my students my L2s didn't, but they had friends from the class that they could interview, or also a set of interviewees that we had set up from the community that they could contact that they had already volunteered. So everybody had somebody to interview. So they had to interview the person, and then they had to get a story about them, and then about a malady and a home remedy that would cure that malady. They also had to find an article online about a malady and other remedies for this malady. So they would get more input, right? And then they would compose their page. We did this on Bookimon, which is a great program. I do it now. There's several iterations of this project. I've done it now. I do it now with Book Creator. I like it better if anybody likes the different programs. But so they had to create their pages, and then they had to read the book once it was out, create questions for the other creators, and then do a presentation. And of course, then we shared the book widely. In fact, you can buy it online now. So if you go to the next slide, you can see they get their handout with the general explanation, and then all the little pieces that are going to be, there's a lot more things that we assess throughout the way, a lot of tasks that bring us to the end product, but these were the ones that they had to hand in or actually carried points. Then they get a spot where they have all their steps and timeline. You remember we were talking about project management. So our project management included, and then their 1-point rubric. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see that I also did some modeling. Ideally, for a project like this, you would want an authentic model, but I couldn't find something quite like what I wanted, so I created one myself. But we also looked at other books as well. And it had the story of the person on one side, the remedy on the other side, and then the alternate remedies for the malady on a little piece. So then if you go to the next one, you are going to see the students here. So they worked on this. This was a project that spanned 3 or 4 weeks. And they would work on the language center, creating their pages, helping each other out, comparing, talking about it. And so there's the collaborative piece. And then the pictures on the right side, you can see them presenting to the rest of the class after they have published the pages. And this is the time for the Q&A, where they would engage in a lot of spontaneous interpersonal communication because, but you know, of course, they've been talking about this for a while, so the language comes a lot easier. So they had all the presentational, interpretive, interpersonal, and we'll probably get to that later. I know Nicole will have questions about that. So I'm not gonna dwell too much on that. But if we go on the next one, I can show you. So that's the front page of the front cover. And then on the next one, you can see that is a remedy for hiccups. By the way, if you don't know, it's a red thread and you put babitas in it, and then you put it on your forehead and your hiccups will go away. On the next page, you will see a remedy for pesadillas, nightmares. And this one, you get an egg and you run it over the person and it takes the nightmare away. On the next one, you will see a one for tummy aches from her mom and her grandmother. And on the next one, you can see one for inflammation, and that one came from her mom. Part of high quality project-based learning, language learning, is also the reflection. So I wanted to just share a little bit of that, and I'm sure we'll get deeper into this. But on the next slide, you'll see I would ask my students to give me, and I really like the note cards. You know, it's just kind of a fun way to get their ideas, and then they know they don't have to write forever, but just enough. And I'll just share very few of their reflections on the next slide. This is from a heritage language learner. This project has been one of my favorites, especially because I had the opportunity to talk to my abuelita about her childhood and her life. So, you know, here you are validating the cultural aspects. And of course, my L2s are also learning this cultural piece, right? From their own classmates. They don't have to go far to learn this. From an L2, this project was interesting to me because in my family, I never grew up with these home remedies. I had not realized they were such a big part of Hispanic culture. So I just love that we can learn how this student, what they got out of it. And then talking about the community in the classroom, it says, I learned about my classmates and other remedies. I will never forget this project. It was one of my favorite ones to do. And another one said, and I plan to buy the book, right? And I actually have the real book, because it's not only an electronic book, we actually got it printed, you know, and you can see all the pictures from the students. So if they wanted it, they could even get it themselves. This was just such a fun project to do. And as we break it down later on, you will be able to see how it all just got integrated so easily, and it had a lot of the qualities of the HQPBLL. Now, as I said, this is, you know, a better iteration. And this is something we were talking about earlier. You know, these projects, you'll probably come up with your idea, your students will do it, something won't work. And they'll go like, oh, well, next time, you know, so by now you're seeing a pretty refined product. And I am teaching the class again next semester. I'm super excited. It'll be online. And of course, with Book Creator, it'll be a breeze because it is such a great tool for collaboration. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that comes out.
Thank you so much. I want to do just as I did with Catherine before we turn it over to some questions. A couple things that you said too that I really wanted to draw out. The iterative nature, in case it doesn't come up again in today's webinar or in next week's webinar, any project-based language learning experience that you're going to facilitate with your learners is going to go through this iterative process, and it may not look like what you or your students imagined the first time you did it, and that could still turn out even better. But also along the way, everybody learns about better ways, more efficient ways, processes to really help with the different elements of high quality project-based learning and so on. And so don't be afraid of the fact that you might run into something that you say, wow, that needs to change if I do. Instead of saying, I'm not going to do it ever again, be comfortable and live in the space of that will just be something that we adjust. And I also just really want to draw out the special benefit that so many, I think, educators have in their classes that Alegria definitely has and really draws on, and that is having a combination of heritage language learners as well as learners who are learning this target language for the first time and are not heritage language learners. And through the really careful work that Alegria has done with the community that she builds in her classes, as well as the way this project is set up to support this, we end up finding that it becomes mutually beneficial to every student in the room to be part of that community, and everyone is now also mutually valued and mutually respected. So I wanted to just highlight that one more time. I noticed several questions have come up in the Q&A, so let's turn it over to that now.
Yeah, I was looking through them, and great questions. Thank you. And I'm glad to answer them. So one is somebody said, what level are these students? And I forgot to share that. So I'm glad to do that. So this is a class that will, so heritage classes are incredibly heterogeneous. And this is just the nature of our heritage classes. We'll have students who have been speaking at home for since they were little, and maybe English became dominant once they went to school, but then you have also students who remember just a few words from their abuelita. And then I got L2s as well, right? So I would say to be in this class, you probably need to be at least novice high, intermediate low, okay? Intermediate low better if you are, but sometimes I've even gotten novice highs, right? And that's where that scaffolding comes in. Oh my goodness. So the first part of the project is just a worksheet where they break down every single part that they're going to do. And there's all the support that goes in there so they can fill in all the parts of their 2 pages with a lot of help, of course. But, and the target, believe it or not, for me, it's intermediate high, advanced. But when I already have an intermediate student, then, you know, I'm going to shoot for superior. But this is the beauty of project-based learning, that when a student is in charge of their learning, they are going to work at their level. And what I mean by this is when I say, for example, let's just think of a regular prompt, like you say, who am I? Who are you? That's such a novice prompt, right? A novice will say something like, my name is Juan. I like dogs. My favorite color is purple. Beautiful novice. But I can use the same prompt and say, who are you? And somebody might say, well, who am I? I ask myself that question every morning as I look in the mirror. Am I the small child my mother hoped I would be? You know, I mean, whole beautiful novels have been written just with that one prompt. So I think that when you come up with something that can be developed at many levels, and you have such diverse learners in your class, differentiation comes in very naturally. Differentiation is built in. But, you know, to answer the question, at least novice high, definitely intermediate low or intermediate would be my preference. But I don't have a lot of control sometimes of who ends up in my classes. And that's where the scaffolding comes in. Let me see, what else do we have here? Does it last the whole semester? No, this is one of 3 projects in that class. And so this one was about 4 weeks, if I remember correctly. And then let's see, what factors determine the project in a project in a project learning? What factors? Well, I think probably you two are going to agree with me. I usually start with what is the theme and what is the product I want? What is the public product that I want? Is it a blog? Is it a book? Is it a video? Is it a poster presentation about food? What is going to be my public product? And then I work backwards. But I want it to be something that the students are going to enjoy. In my class, I know, for example, since it was a health and well-being class, that this project would go well. But there is a lot of choice within the project itself, because they can choose the remedy, they can choose the people they interview. So there is definitely choice in there as well, even though it's quite structured at the same time. So I think I have answered all my questions. I don't know if I missed something.
Yeah, so I'd like to follow up actually on, you know, looking at what are some of the factors, and I know Kathleen might want to follow up on this as well, some of the factors that go into selecting projects. And one of the, so depending on the learners and the range of proficiency at which the learners are operating, often we'll find that, just as Alegria said, we're going to have a little more control as the teachers over kind of the choice of project, as well as the choice of what the products will be and what kinds of choices students have for the products. But we are also always looking for an opportunity at that kind of right moment for learners when they're really reaching that ability with the language to work in this way, where it's actually driven by the learners themselves. So that's another way that you can go, depending on your learners and depending on their proficiency ranges and whether they can, you know, handle that kind of work. You can actually do a lot of work with having the learners be involved in helping narrow down possible areas for inquiry and exploration, as well as possible outcomes of what might happen depending on what it is you're working on, whether it's a product you need to produce or a procedure you want to propose to address like a, you know, step-by-step to address some kind of situation or problem. And ultimately, you know, Alegria said something else really important about how the nature of project-based learning lends itself to being appropriate for learners in heterogeneous classrooms that have a lot of different ranges and abilities and areas of expertise that they bring to the work and to the learning every single day. So what we are trying to do is help shape those experiences so that learners find themselves operating at kind of their optimum level of challenge. And there isn't an easy answer necessarily to how to do that, but it's something that I try to keep in mind when designing learning experiences is what can I do to make sure that every learner in my classroom is able to approach this from an optimum level of challenge so that the ones who want to go deeper, go farther, go faster, whatever it is we're working on, go in a different direction, take it in another, you know, take it in a more innovative way than I was thinking, explore it in a way that's more personally connected to them. What kinds of opportunities can we provide for that? And I wanted, this actually segues nicely because Catherine and Alegria, you might recall, one of the things I wanted to give you both an opportunity to do is kind of talk to each other about your projects, whether you wanted to bring up some connections you see, whether something one of you said reminded the other of you of something you wanted to share, or even if you wanted to ask each other questions.
I have a question.
I have a question for you too. So who goes first?
You go first.
Well, I'm just really intrigued by the option of creating such a long project, because my projects usually last 4 or 5 weeks is the longest I've been able to do one.
Right.
Even though on my food and society class, it was the whole semester because we created a whole website about food, but it was different pieces to it. So it was like 7 mini projects for the whole website. But in your case, it really is the same topic and it extends. So I was wondering, what do you do with students who join midway?
I don't have
how
that.
do you bring them in? Because that's a tricky thing, right? The reluctant student, or the student who misses something, or that joins in the middle, and we still want the project to go forward. So it happens in a 4-week project and a 5-week project. I cannot imagine how you handle that on a 3-year project.
Well, I will say that, first of all, I don't run into that because in high school, if they're going to go on from French 2 to French 3 to French 4, I don't have kids that will drop in. We don't have too many students that come in from out of district. But if they did, and this is a very tight, we have one high school. So it's a special place, Mount Vernon, where we teach. If they did, we just catch them up real quick on, this is school lunch. Okay, we talked about that. But each project, it doesn't necessarily depend that you did the one before it. It's just that you gained the food vocabulary, the descriptive, giving your opinions. You gain those skills, and then we're transferring it to the next one. And usually I finish the school lunch project. It's about 6 to 8 weeks, depending when spring break is, right? And so that's the end of the year. And then we start the next term with that next level. And we only spend about 6 to 8 weeks on that. And then in their senior year, that's when we were like using the AP level language, because that's part of the AP questions, et cetera. It deals with the global issues and the global challenges, right? So that's how we finished it out. Basically, I'm prepping my students for the AP test since French 1. Right, we get them ready, and each time we're building on. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they had to do all that exact project. They can plop into the project, and it's not as seamless as you would imagine, because we were talking a little bit about challenges. Our biggest challenge is that we are overcoming in French classes the K-12 model of learning. And I do point that out very gently, that sometimes we kind of have that, how am I going to say this, Nicole? Worksheet mentality of, do this work, that's your grade, right? That's not how we're very project-based. We're very standards-based. You're reaching towards this level. And kids have had maybe 9 or 10 years of school before they come to me, and they're like, oh, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's right.
What? You are expecting,
you can't just fill in the worksheet and get the A?
Right. And so part of this, from me starting with my sophomores, and usually French 2 is sophomores, right? About 14 to 15-year-olds, is training them how to be those project managers, so that by the time we get to the actual like AP thing, I don't have to start there. Because if I started with those seniors or the 11th graders, whatever level they are in AP, and saying, we're going to look at language and ideas at this level, I would have missed all those 2 years of training them to be able to be those types of thinkers and doers and learners. Our district's working very hard with our STEM and our overcoming that. Yeah, that's the way I have to say it. We're overcoming, we're working around that mentality. A lot of our students are given this, if you check this box, you've learned type of language, and that's, when we're doing PBL, that's not how it works. And the kids are not upset about it, but they're confused. And it's part of my job is to, we call them baby pas, little baby steps, right? baby steps towards being those project developers. And they actually transfer a lot of those skills to their other classes,
Yes.
right? So they go back to their other teachers and say, well, okay, we were learning about women's education and how to support, the right of women to attend school. And their social studies teacher, which class? And we're like, oh, that was in French class, haha. Yes, a big win for us in world languages, because we are doing something. When we do PBL in the world language, we are giving the biggest gift to those other content area teachers that, and not just the content, those students are going to be lifelong producers and learners. So I'll stop there because I will a whole hour on that.
But I have to tell you, this is music to my ears, because I have to thank you, and I have to thank anybody who's attending this right now, because you're either doing it or you're interested in doing it.
Mhm.
And that is so life-changing. There is no sadder moment for me as the director of my world languages program at the university. I do a lot of the placement. And so students come in and they want to know where they're going to place. And they tell me, oh, I had 4 years. I had 3 years in high school, right?
Yeah.
So I said, well, my program is a proficiency-oriented program. So I need to know what you can do.
Yeah.
Not what you know about the language, but what can you do with the language? But this is the way the conversation goes. They will go, so I did 3 years. I can do the past, the preterite, the imperfect, the subjunct, and they give you the list. Direct object pronoun, and they give you the list. And I tell them that's wonderful, but I need to know what you can produce. So let's switch to the target language. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
All of it, because what they have been taught has been so devoid of meaning. I mean, so devoid. I have heard some of my students who, sadly, I have to place them back in 101 after all this schooling they had. They will go, do you ever get this where they go, they start doing just the verb endings? Amos, eyes, and I go, what are you doing? At first, I didn't know. Talk about
a song.
Absolutely devoid of meaning, right?
Yeah.
Whereas here in project-based learning, I mean, we are just really giving them a task of what can you actually do?
Mhm.
What
Thank
can
you.
you achieve? All these are little pieces, but these little pieces mean nothing without the actual meaningful communication. And so I love it that you are doing it and that people who are here are wanting to do it, because it's a great service to the students. And when they come to my university, they'll be able to go to 300 level class right away, because I don't need to be worrying about any of these other things.
There's a great way to track all of that learning that they do. If you want to use like Linguafolio or something else where they have that, they're chronicling their learning through the different things, so that when they go to the secondary, the post-secondary learning, and they say, I'm able to talk about myself, I can give opinions, I can, right? All those I can say. We're trying to prep them for that next appearance on the world language stage, right?
Yeah.
And what I did learn, the way I learned German was very much about those oh my goodness, I can conjugate any verb for you. I can give you all the different declinations, but ask me to talk about myself in German. And so Alegria, my other question for you, what are the other topics that you do in a semester?
Perfect. That was in the chat too. So thank you.
So in this particular class, you mean?
Yeah, in that one.
Yeah, on my health and well-being class. Well, I will tell you what I did that semester and what I'm doing this coming semester. So that semester we did 2 other projects. We did a nutritional guide. And so the students also kept track of what they were eating and created a nutritional plan for other classmates. Because of how aware we are now of what you were talking about earlier, I think I'm going to skip it this semester. A lot of our students are food insecure, and it might trigger things that back then I wasn't thinking about as strongly as I do now. So I'm actually going to do a mental health project where they are going to do gratitude, and they're going to keep a journal on how they're taking care of their little hearts and their little minds. And then we will, try to put together a guide for other students to take care of our mental health. So that's kind of the change.
And
And the other project in the previous class was picking a problem, any problem of health that they would think of, and we went through so many of them. We went through so many of them. And so there were lots of problems. And so they would do a newscast, like a news magazine cast, and they would talk about the problem, and then we would put it up on YouTube. I'm going to change it this semester, coming semester again, for two reasons. The first one, they will probably all do coronavirus. And how boring is that? But the second one, because, we are in such a state right now of I don't know, I think we're all fragile emotionally. We sometimes forget how edgy we are. And I don't want them to think about problems. I want them to think about solutions. And I tried a project on my class this semester, which was my representations of migration class and my language and society class. I did these two classes this semester, and my students had to write children's books to teach other children about migration, or to teach other children about language and society. You would not believe the books they wrote in Book Creator. Things like, it's amazing to be bilingual, my identity, the story of this little octopus who goes to a new school because their family had to move for a new job to a new part of the ocean, and all the kids were mean, but since she had 8 arms, she went to music class and picked the drums, and now all the kids love her. So they wrote children's books, because I think when the students feel that their work their knowledge and their own life experiences can impact others as to how to tackle problems, then it's just so inspiring to them. So I've seen amazing results with having my students write children's books about the different things. So I'm going to have them write children's books about health.
Okay.
In this new class. So I'm super excited.
I have to tell you, your students and my students need to get together, because we did trilingual books.
Mm-hmm.
They are in Spanish, French, and English. And we go to the elementary school, to the dual language kids, and we try and get them into French, because they're taking dual language, Spanish, English, and we're like, hey, you could also do French. But they do that. They love writing the children's books. And they talk a little bit about themselves, saying, why did I choose to learn this third or fourth language?
Yeah.
Why did I choose to go on? And they're giving that inspiration to the little kindergartners and first graders. Your students and my students could read their books to each other. It would be so amazing.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. Now we're going to make connections, and we've got new connections between our learners happening as well. We did get a question in the chat that I'll actually kind of give to both of you, although it was originally directed to Alegria. And that has to do with balancing, if you do have a textbook, balancing the use of the textbook and students working on their projects, or balancing the content from, however you'd, just maybe a couple minutes from each of you really quickly, or
You should go first. You should.
Me first. I'm very lucky. Somebody said, how do you get your other colleagues to do project-based learning? Well, I run the department. So, so it's been very easy for me. We are actual-based. We do our 5 C's. We do our modes. We do our can-dos. So that has never been a problem. And I have also hired people who are of the same mind, and we get together, we share our projects, so it's the only way. I have a lot of colleagues in college who cannot do this, by the way, and they just find 2 allies and they huddle together and just pray for the rest of the students in the other classes. So there's a variety. But what about the textbooks? This is a great question. So on our classes that use textbooks, which is our beginner and intermediate classes, we run them parallel. So you're doing your stuff, your textbook stuff, and then you're also running parallel, and you do checks every week of where you are in your project, but the students work more independently on the project with checks, and then you're doing the textbook stuff. So it's more parallel. But actually on my intermediate classes, my 200 level classes, we have made away with 2 of the 3 classes, only one uses a textbook, and the other one is all authentic materials now. So we're going full on authentic materials. And from 300 on, I have actually written the textbooks for the different, so I'm really big on OER, and also my university has, as I had said, both students who go hungry, students who are homeless, and I'm not going to charge them $300 for a book, or 200, or even 100. So we've produced a lot of our own OERs, and I would be happy to share my website where you can find all these OERs and use them in your classes, including OERs that my students have produced as a project, including the Music and Society book, which was written by my students for other students of Spanish to use. So I'll be glad, I'll put it on the chat. But this is a challenge, right? Especially if we have to cover the textbook. Right. How do we introduce project-based? And so my idea is you just go parallel, and you just pick maybe one project for the whole semester or 2 projects. And that way you just sneak it right in.
Kathleen, did you want to address that a little bit too before?
Well, it's pretty easy. We've never had a textbook. I've never used one. I write everything, and it's all based on what I've learned from ACTful webinars and workshops, working with people in California. I don't know who I know down there. Yes, I think that we choose stuff that's student focused, right? We are student focused, so we are not talking about chores in the same way. We don't have chapters on going to the doctor. Okay, so we don't have that situation of having to, what we cover are the language standards, the national standards, and that includes all those I can statements and the proficiency levels. And then we choose themes. I use the AP themes at all levels, but then we come up with different essential questions. When Alegria mentioned, who am I? We do that in every single year. And that each time it expands, and the questions become deeper, and the language becomes more expanded. There's so much you can do with that. If you are using a textbook, I look at it and why does it have to go in order? Right. Why do you have to learn the preterite here? What do you, I'm going to go a little off balance if I keep going on that line, but yeah, we can look at a textbook and say, what is it that we can pull out of it? But we're pretty much 100% authentic resources for the French teachers that might be here. I have about 100,000 things that you can use.
Yes, she does. And I just want to jump in on that as well. I know that we probably have some teachers in attendance here today that are in a situation where they have a district or a department that has a policy that says, we use this book, you must get to this page, and so on. And my advice, or my kind of thinking toward that, is as much as possible going to what both Alegria and Catherine said, and it's the same way I would approach it as well, is we are really not focused on what or how much we cover. That's not the point, and it never has been the point, nor has the point ever been for the textbook to be the instructor. It was never supposed to replace the quality work of the professional educator who designs learning experiences that are going to both meet the needs of their learners and promote their learners' success towards their goals. So the textbooks, if you have them, are resources, and you can draw bits out of them that you can use, and you can still get to the same place. If the content, all the content is ultimately something that is used in everyday conversation and in conversations in the target language cultures around the world. So I, like our guests, really like to focus on how can we situate that language in real life contexts that are more meaningful, and use the textbooks and its ancillaries for particular resources that might be helpful at the time.
One little follow-up comment is that in my most current job, 15 years ago, I was asked to teach Spanish 1, and I had never used, Spanish is my 5th language. It was a challenge. It sounded like Italian. The teacher, the department chair was so upset with me when I said, I'm not going to be using your textbook, but I promise that my students will be able to take that test that you have them take at the end of the semester and pass it, and they did. And they went on to AP Spanish. I mean,
Exactly.
Right, they did, because I knew that they were looking for these things. I pulled those into the units that I developed.
Yeah.
So that the little grammar, like multiple choice things, okay, they filled them out, they got it right, and we were successful. It's hard to tell your department that you're going to try something completely different, but you can give them the assurances. I promise the students will be able to do these things that we're asking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I do feel for K-12 though, because you guys have a lot more constraints. With it seems, I mean, it seems from talking to my colleagues in K through 12 that there's just like all these things that they have to check off, a lot more than we do at the university level. But I think that it's very inspirational for those of you teaching K-12 to see how you're getting around that, because at the end of the day, don't we want them to actually speak the language? Doesn't it break your heart when you meet people who say, "Oh yeah, I took 4 years of French," you know? And I will begin with myself. I was sharing this earlier, right? I took 2 years of French in college. It was very grammar based. And I did not continue because then French 300 was going to be all literature. And at that time, literature was not my thing. I like it now, but back then, you know, I was a college kid. And so I didn't continue. Now, had my classes been something like food and society, music and society, health and well-being, all this film and society, I probably would have. And if I would have been doing projects, I would. I still remember my madame that taught me, that had one project in the class. She was able to sneak one in. She snuck one in. And it was, we had to write a song. And this is the only thing I remember from my French class, you know? So I think that makes a huge difference. And the excitement of the students. And let's talk about the excitement of the teachers. Do you rather read, you know those exams that are so not together at all? They're like vocabulary, reading comprehension.
Here's a random this and a random that.
It's like all these pieces that have nothing to do with anything, and you have to go one by one, and you just want to die. I mean, by the 30th one, you're like, oh God, this is so painful. Compare that to the joy I just had reading my students storybooks for children.
Exactly.
I couldn't wait. I was like in this state of elation that you wouldn't imagine, you know. I was running around the house, showing it to my husband, showing it to my puppy, because it was so cool. And I have nobody else around. So I call some of my friends. But truly, even for us as instructors, when we do these projects, it is so incredible first to see how much our students can achieve under our guidance and through, good design projects, what they can achieve, and then how exciting it is to see and assess those products. And at the end of the day, if you ask me, they should all get A's, because by the time the final product has come, if we have done enough support, enough formative assessments, enough, they should all be perfect. So I have no problem if all my students get A's. Why wouldn't they?
Right.
So I think it's such a much more joyful way to teach.
You hit. I know we have to go to the performance-based assessment, but just to quickly hit on something Catherine said. Really, what I know I found in my case as well, Catherine, I had a lot of autonomy actually as a K-12 language teacher. But you know why? And I've thought about this a lot. When the students are achieving in a real and meaningful way, and people see what students literally can do, it actually really makes others in that same system a lot more comfortable with, well, yeah, Nicole does things in a different way, but it works. So clearly it works. And learning through assessment, like I love it when my learners actually learn and enjoy the assessment. So we're going to dive into assessments right now. Okay. And we have a few questions that are going to try to connect your, we are going to try to connect your HQ PBLLs to some aspects of language learning, but also specifically performance assessments. So very quickly, we'll start with Alegria and then move to Catherine. Can you just share quickly what the learning targets were for each mode of communication for the high quality project-based language learning project you shared with us?
All right. I'm sorry, I got distracted because Ali Garib has asked 4 questions and we have not answered them. But we'll probably get to them, Ali, I promise. I promise. So I was sharing before, because of the variety of students that I have in my class, my learning targets seem to be moving targets. I have to confess. But this is, I would say, is part of the differentiation that
Absolutely.
is built into project-based learning.
Can you share 1 or 2?
So for example, let me think here. So for presentational, let's say, right? So here we have a finished product of a page that is gonna present this information. So I want them to inform, I want them to explain what this home remedy is. And this is gonna be advanced. You know, I am looking for a very polished product here, for sure. And then, of course, the intercultural aspect of it comes in very natural as well, because of the nature of the class itself, and because the students are sharing and drawing all these comparisons between what we do to take care of ourselves in the Anglo culture versus the Hispanic culture. So all these things just, to me, come very organically. But truly, the targets sometimes are moving targets for me.
Absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense with the nature of HQ project-based learning. Catherine, did you want to share 1 or 2 learning targets that you had for your learners with the food waste project?
If I look at it for the interpretive, it's a lot of, I can understand written and spoken authentic resources that give suggestions, opinions, and recommendations for food waste. And the interpersonal, the students are able to use interpersonal speaking and writing. The writing was more for connecting with the people online that we were discussing with. So they were asking Twitter questions, participating in chats. And the interpersonal speaking was when we were talking to the chef, that's one, but I also had them discuss their practices at home and at school, and their practices in food waste and preservation. And presentation was that they can give, I can give opinions, suggestions, recommendations. I can state my, I can take a standpoint and support it with arguments. So in that project-based learning, we're really looking at the intellectual challenge. And I want them to be able to reach up to that intermediate, mid, high level of being able to really say, this is what I believe, this is my proof, this is how I got there.
And so how did you set it up or make it possible for your learners to build the language skills necessary to achieve those targets? Meaning, this is a question we get a lot when we work with teachers around PBLL, and at the same time that they're working through their processes on this project, they invariably also need to develop and hone their language skills. So do you have one strategy of probably the many that you use that you could share that helped learners build the language skills they needed specific to this HQ PBLL?
So I'm going to talk about 2. One of them I learned from you, believe it or not, it's that word salad. It's that
I love reading salad. It's one of my favorites.
Okay, reading salad has really, and I've tweaked it each time that I've used it. So what I say to the students, reading salad is where the students are having a group conversation, maybe like 4 or 5 students. They have different colored little pieces of paper. One might be, I'm going to offer a summary. I need a clarifying question. I can offer my opinion. I can make a connection. And each student is going to put in a little piece of paper in the middle of the salad, like you're trying to build a multicolored salad. And that way they could choose either kind of like an easy, like I can make a summary of something, or the harder level is like they've got that little sentence frame there. In my opinion, I believe that. So they can each contribute something to the conversation. Nicole, did I miss anything about explaining that?
Not in the time that we have, no.
Right. Okay. Second thing is I use picture talks to introduce our theme, our question, our problem. Right now we are working on the negative impacts of tourism around the world. We talked about tourism because we can't go anywhere. And now we're talking about what happens when we do too much tourism. And we looked at the environmental impact. And what I did was I showed them lots of pictures. I used all of those sentences, those frames, those expressions that I'm hoping to get them to as I was going through the picture talk. And then I backed it up with what do you think this expression meant? We do a lot of just check-ins real quick. The students then have those frames. Right now we're using Quizlet and Google Slides, so that they're getting that frame, that chunk that they can make their own opinions. They're going to take some of my language, some of their language, put it together, and now they've got a beautiful intermediate chunk.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly address a question in the chat, and then I know for Alegria and Catherine, I'm going to move us into performance assessment pretty quickly because our time is winding down rapidly. But someone actually asked about the difference between high quality project-based learning experiences and those that wouldn't necessarily rise to the standard of high quality project-based learning. And while that could be the subject of an entire webinar or even professional learning series, in a nutshell, there are a lot of projects that happen in all disciplines, not just world languages. And that doesn't mean they're bad, right? They are projects. They provide learners with additional opportunities to demonstrate what they know and can do relative to both the content that they are perhaps specifically studying, as well as whatever interdisciplinary tools come into play. But they won't include all of the elements that we discussed earlier of high quality project-based learning. And so there could be one or several components missing. And when those components are missing, it takes away from the richness of the project, as well as the potential that project has to really have a meaningful impact on the learner, not just as an academic exercise, but as something that they really engaged in and participated in and felt like they produced something of value, not just to themselves and their teacher, but to others out of, and that they had a chance to reflect on. So thinking about your high quality project-based language learning, we're going to talk about the role that performance assessments played, and they might have occurred during kind of multiple phases of your high quality project-based language learning. They probably aren't all at the end. There were probably performance assessments happening throughout, but I want to quickly remind people just what performance assessment is, as opposed to the kind of assessment that Alegria referred to earlier, where there were these just discrete random academic language exercises. So performance assessments are always going to assess the learning targets in a very communicative, situational, contextualized way. They typically assess both language and cultural knowledge by the way they're structured. And if it's an interpretive assessment, then it's going to use authentic documents with proficiency level appropriate tasks for the learners in terms of what it is we ask them to pull out of that document and show that they understand. And production tasks, whether it's interpersonal mode or presentational mode, are going to be authentic. In other words, we're going to provide students with opportunities to use the language the way it would be used in a contextual situation in a target culture setting. And they're also going to be appropriate to both the age and the targeted proficiency range of the learner. And this is synthesized from Charisse Montgomery, who's someone that I really admire and follow and have had the pleasure to meet and take some really transformative professional learning under. But if you wanted to synthesize down into 2 minutes, because we don't have 2 hours or more to talk about how to make performance assessments, as opposed to just assign vocabulary list exercises and grammar verb conjugation exercises on a test, you want to select a meaningful topic, locate culturally authentic texts if it's an interpersonal task, develop cognitively challenging interpretive tasks so that they're really having to dig into that, whether it's an audio, a video, or a print text, and infer and do other work beyond just the keyword recognition, which is just one piece. We want to design opportunities for students to talk. That's what they signed up for the class for, right? So we don't want to deny that to them. And we want to support students in sharing their learning with the tools that will help them be successful, whether they need a template, a graphic organizer, other tools. And we also want to provide timely feedback when we give them performance tasks to practice for their eventual performance assessments. And I wish we had time to share today some strategies for giving feedback like in distance learning, but with that introduction to those performance assessments, we'll take at least a couple of questions about the performance assessments that Alegria and Catherine did. So first of all, really quickly, Alegria, can you kind of just call back out for us the aspects of the project-based language learning experience that your students went through that served as either performance tasks for practice or performance assessments?
All right. Yeah. So I think, thank you for summarizing that for everybody, because it's really hard to think, you know, how are we even assessing all this stuff? But one of the things I would say is the one thing you don't want to do is just assess the final product. You want the assessment to be happening all throughout, and you want those assessments to build towards that final product. Some of it will be assessment and carry a grade. Some of it will be assessment and not carry a grade. It'll just be formative. You know, you just talk with your partner about how this is going, where are you at, and give each other feedback. You know, total interpersonal, meaningful, spontaneous conversation. That is in a way peer assessing. Where are you? Let's check. They don't get points for that, but it's happening in the class. So, you know, there's just assessment going all throughout. It's really hard to break it down. Now, for purposes of actually giving them a grade, because we still, you know, if it were my perfect world, we would not live in that world, but, you know, we still are having to assign grades to things. Then this one particular project I showed has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces that get points. But they get points for different things, right? So there's a worksheet, and by worksheet, please don't think it's like the old worksheets. This is a very natural thing you would do when you are writing a book. You create an outline, you take notes, you brainstorm. This is a natural thing, a natural behavior of writing a book. So that's, you know, the worksheet, and very easy. You do it, you get 10 points. Why wouldn't you? You know, you did it. It's a functional worksheet. Why not? They would also get 10 points for writing out the interview questions for their interviewee and the answers. And so, you know, 10 points right there. Then they would get 10 points for finding the article online, an authentic article, there's an authentic task, pulling the main ideas, right? Finding the ingredients, the malady, whatever that may be. And also, so, you know, a real task. Again, if you are writing a book, you're doing your research, you all do it, you pull main ideas, they had to as well. Then the text document itself. So just writing the document that's going to go with all the narration, the description, you know, and you were asking me, you know, about the moving targets. Well, you know, the targets might move, but at the end of the day, you know, that page has to be advanced. Yeah. There's got to be narration. There's got to be description of this maybe familiar or unfamiliar to some topics, and they got to be able to do it. But this page goes through many iterations. Exactly. How do I get them to look advanced? Well, because this is performance.
Yeah, I like what you said there. That they look advanced, and they've had all those iterations and feedback, and so by the time they get there, it looks advanced and it's pretty good, and they're probably going to get a good grade.
And it should, right? It's not proficient. I'm not asking you cold. I mean, after you do it so many times, then it's gonna be advanced. And then there were 20 points just for putting together the page, the design. You know, these are real life skills. And when we look at high quality project-based learning, we are talking about authenticity, you know, making choices, learning how to use tools of the real world. And this is in my graded assessment. Then the mini presentation Q&A that brings this interpersonal, very spontaneous, but by then also they have iterated, they have written 5 versions of the page. Exactly. They have, you know, by the time they got to talk about it spontaneously, they got so much more, you know, they're built, it's all built in. And then of course, I always give some points for the reflection piece.
Of course.
But it is important, and I want them to understand that reflecting about what you just did, what you engaged in, is incredibly important. And if you don't give points for process, then students don't think that process is important.
Yeah.
I would argue that process is the most important.
And I could actually totally see that, because it's going to support them to, get to that final destination. So thinking about what she said and translate it kind of back to your own project, Catherine, I'm going to kind of guide you in a slightly different direction. So while your learners are engaged in the inquiry and collaboration aspects throughout their work in PBLL, and of course, building their new language and interculturality skills, how do you provide space for them to also do, as Alegria said, practice the performance tasks before being formally assessed? Or maybe phrased differently, what strategies do you use for making the practice of performance tasks an authentic component of the full HQ-PBLL experience? You only have about 2 minutes, though. It's like
I can make it quick. I think my biggest idea is taking the going from the interpretive mode to the interpersonal, and helping them out there is what they're grabbing from whatever they're reading. So infographics or articles or tweets, social media. And then what they're listening to, so I have lots of authentic videos of people talking about this. They're going to grab the language from that. They're going to like, what did I hear? What did I understand? What can I use in my speaking? So that when we get to our conversation, that you saw that those pictures are the students having to come together and make agreements together. Like, we're going to have to cook with these 5 ingredients. What do we need to do? We need to be able to agree, disagree. We need to use some cooking vocabulary, and then we need to make suggestions. I think we should use the pizza for the dessert. I agree, I disagree, because, so they're pulling that, whatever they can pull from the interpretive that they're getting, and they make their own little lists. And then we kind of talk together, like, what did you get out of it? What did I get out of it? They're usually chronicling what they hear, because I don't assess them on every single word.
Right.
But what else did you get out of it? What do you think you're going to be able to use in your project? Right. So they're growing that. And then when they're practicing again is now, I've got those words. Can I try them out in this interpersonal, this task that we're doing? Okay. So that, because when we make our final presentation to the district, how can we reduce food waste in our district? We've read it, we've heard it, we've talked about it, we've written it. And by that time, we are getting to our goal.
What I like about that is it really paralleled to, like, what we're hearing is essentially the same thing with 2 different HQ-PBLL examples, that we're going to keep giving students opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to work with the kind of content, vocabulary, and language that they'll need, to work with the additional language structures and stems and tools that they'll need, and to do those over and over and over again, so that by the time they come to, they've done all kinds of performance tasks leading up to it, whether they were graded or not. By the time they come to their culminating event of their high quality project-based language learning experience, they are in fact ready for go time, right? They can do this.
Exposed so many times to this tier 1 and tier 2 language, right? That they don't have to resort to Google Translate cheating, right? They have all the tools, and
they're
that's
confident.
For that idea. So we scaffold the heck out of it, as I say.
And as Alegria said too, right? Because it's something we've made it possible for them to engage at this level because of all the work we've done around this content to support it.
Right. It's not a got you thing. It's not like we're trying to go like, oh, okay, do it now without any support. So yeah, it is with help, but that is how we all do it. We were just talking earlier, right? We're here, we're talking, but a lot of us, we have our notes.
Yes.
We also prepare. This is what normal people do. It's not like, tell me about this out of the blue.
Exactly.
It was all up here, I swear.
Every bit of it. I really want to thank you both, Catherine, Alegria, and I also want to thank Richard Medina, who's been kind of behind the scenes taking care of everything for us as well. But I want to thank our guests for joining us this evening. And if you feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg, you're right. So Catherine and Alegria will be back in part 2 on Tuesday. I hope you're able to join us. We'll continue to explore our overarching question by examining how integrated performance assessments can be a compelling feature of high quality project-based language learning. So this webinar itself will become part of the content of a short course designed for language teachers who have a good understanding of PBLL and wish to explore the intersections between PBLL and topics of relevance, such as high leverage teaching practices, as we did last year, or this year's focus on performance assessments. So again, for more information about the NFLRC and its short courses and programs, please visit nflrc.hawaii.edu. We also invite you to offer feedback on this webinar by completing the form that Richard put in the chat for us. You can also see it on your screen if you want to take a quick shot of it, but you can grab it from the chat so that you can give us feedback on our work. And we look forward to being back with you on Tuesday.